Justice and equality. You can't hear us? Charlie? They're not hearing me. Is that better? Thank you. Let me start over. Good morning. Welcome to Westside Unitarian Universalist Church, where compassion leads us to work for justice and equality. I'm glad you came today, and it is my hope that you will find something here that nourishes your heart, feeds your mind, and grows your spirit. My name is Glenda Hood, and I am your worship leader today. Be you a spiritual seeker, an atheist, or a theist, Westside is a community of many beliefs, genders, and sexualities. A community of diverse cultural, racial, and class backgrounds. A community of varied abilities and gifts. Some here find inspiration in the great books, others in the great outdoors, and others still in great conversations. Whoever you may be, all are welcome in our inclusive congregation. To newcomers and old friends alike, together we say, welcome. Today we welcome Reverend Thomas McCracken, who will reflect upon the fuzzy lines separating church and state. While most of us agree that a constitutional separation of church and state creates a healthy nation, Thomas will highlight a few lesser-known areas in everyday society where the government accommodates religion, inviting us to consider how these lines should be drawn. At Westside, we are raising the next generation of Unitarian Universalists, and we want them to know that they are an important part of our community. Several years ago, we chose to be radically inclusive and to adopt a multi-generational worship service, where our services include all family members. So, welcome to all children and youth of all ages. There are a number of announcements included in your order of service. Please take any of them that you might need for reminders this week or to share with others. I'd like to call your attention to the list of upcoming services. Next Sunday, Reverend Laura Brandis will join us. And the following Sunday, the 24th, we will be holding two services, conversation and carols at our normal regular time of 10:30, and carols and readings at 6 p.m. We look forward to seeing you as you are able. For those of you joining us online or visiting with us today, if you're not already on our mailing list, please sign up by clicking the link at the bottom of our homepage at westsideuu.org website. And for those of you here in person with us, please take a moment now to silence your devices. We are also having a book drive for students at Daggett Middle School. Books have always been some of my favorite Christmas presents over the years, and we have the opportunity to help these students. There is an angel or a tree in the fellowship hall where you can choose a book that you'd like to purchase, and then you would bring it back here to the church. Now, I invite you to take a deep breath, and from wherever you are, settle into this sacred space that we create, and let us worship together as we listen to this morning's prelude, Hivenu Shalom Aleichem, a traditional Hanukkah song performed by Dr. Yuki Kumamoto. Your music gets our blood moving sometimes. Thank you for that. Our opening words today are, "Come into this circle of community, come into this sacred space," by Andrew Pakula. Come into this circle of community. Come into this sacred space. Be not tentative. Bring your whole self. Bring the joy that makes your heart sing. Bring your kindness and your compassion. Bring also your sorrow, your pain. Bring your brokenness and disappointments. Spirit of love and mystery, help us to recognize the spark of the divine that resides within each of us. May we know the joy of wholeness. May we know the joy of being together. As many Unitarian Universalist congregations do, we begin our time this morning with the lighting of a chalice. In recognition of Hanukkah, we will also be lighting a menorah. I invite Myrtle McMahon to come forward and light our chalice and menorah this morning and to read the blessing. The chalice is a symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith and represents the Unitarian Universalist Association, or UUA. The flaming chalice symbolizes the heritage of our past, the warmth of community, and the light of hope within this church today. The 8 candles on the menorah symbolize the number of days that the temple lantern blazed. The 9th candle, the shamash, is a helper candle used to light the others. Families light 1 candle on the first day, 2 on the second, and so on, after sundown during the 8 days of Hanukkah while reciting prayers and singing songs.
Today is the fourth day of Hanukkah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who has kept us and brought us to this season. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvahs, commanding us to kindle the Hanukkah lights. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who perform wondrous deeds for our ancestors in days old at this season.
Our opening hymn is number 221, Light One Candle, in the gray hymnal. Please stand as able and join our song leader, Linda Ice, as Yuki Kumamoto accompanies. Please remain standing and join me in our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to work for justice through action, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. You may be seated. This is the time for all ages, so please come forward if you are young or young at heart or would like to have a closer view of our Time for All Ages presented by Nikki Kennedy, Director of Lifespan Education. And does anybody know where Nikki is? Oh, okay, Lane. Okay, great. Well, be presented by Lane Craig this morning. Hello.
so glad to see y'all. Hey, Simon and Lincoln. Oh, I see some brothers coming. Yeah. All right. Well, y'all, welcome to church today. We just learned that it is the fourth day of Hanukkah. And Hanukkah is an important celebration in the Jewish tradition. And so we're going to learn just a little bit more about Hanukkah right now. Hanukkah means dedication in Hebrew. What does dedication mean? Do we know? Simon, do you know? No. Yeah, I don't know. James, do you know? I don't know. Like maybe being, Aiden, what do you think dedication means? Sorry, I put you on the spot. I don't know. Maybe means like being really committed to something, like I'm dedicated to my family. I bet y'all are too, right? Something we really care about. So this is a where every night families can light one of the candles to help us think about warmth and dedication and comfort and also the miracle that Hanukkah celebrated. So here's the miracle. Over 2,000 years ago, Antiochus, who was a cruel ruler of the Greek kingdom, imposed pagan beliefs on the Jewish people and told them to worship Zeus. I know some of y'all know who Zeus is, right? Yeah. But the Jewish people did not worship Zeus. They had their own god, and they said, we don't want to do that. And so they, the Maccabees, who were a group of these Jewish people who had been told to worship Zeus, they were so unhappy that they rose up and risked their lives to battle the big Greek army. So the small army of the Maccabees battled the big army of the Greeks, and they eventually defeated the Greek general. So what they won and what they were hoping to get was dedication and like preservation of their church, of their temple, which had their Torah, which was like their sacred book inside of it. So they saved their sacred book from people who had wanted them to destroy it. And so they were so happy, and they came back into the temple, and they were going to light the candles that showed their dedication, kind of like we have here our chalice, as well as our menorah. But unfortunately, there wasn't very much oil. They didn't have enough oil to keep the light going, to praise their God. But when they lit the candle, even though there was so little oil, the candle stayed burning for 8 nights, which was until they were able to get more oil and continue to take care of and kind of have their temple as a special sacred place. And so this was a miracle. They all said, it's a miracle. And they danced and celebrated because this beautiful thing had happened that they didn't think was possible, that the oil lasted for the 8 nights. And so that's why, that's the celebration of Hanukkah, or the story behind it, which is a celebration of being dedicated and caring about your religion and your beliefs and your sacred spaces, and the way in which that can feel like a miracle. It can feel really special and magical to have that commitment and that dedication. Taylor. So do y'all want to guess what's in the box? Anyone who knows about Hanukkah? Amelia, do you want to guess first? It could be a menorah. It's not. It's a good guess. What else, Hayes? What could be? It could be a dreidel. It is. In this box, I have a dreidel for everybody. Alice, could you maybe hand out the dreidels? Everyone has a dreidel, and everyone also has some chocolate gelt. So please show that to your parents before you figure out what to do with it. I know. Hayes, have you played dreidel before? Do you know what that is? I know you have. Yeah. You played it too? Yeah. So this is a game, you played it maybe, I bet. This is a game that Jews in Syria, way back a long time ago, would play as a way to kind of show their religion, even when it wasn't really allowed to be openly practiced. And now it's a game that kids often play at Hanukkah. Your dreidel, your little top, has 4 sides, and the 4 sides have 4 symbols on them. And you probably just get your parents to Google it, which symbol means what. But the symbols are Nun, Gimel, Hey, and Shin, and you use those to figure out how much chocolate you get when you put a pile in the middle and you take some out. So you can Google the rules. Tell me again.
We already have a dreidel at home, but it's okay if we have to.
It's okay if you have two. Okay. You need one for your brother, for sure, for sure. Okay. So I'm so glad that y'all were here. I hope that you get to go home and play with your dreidel and learn even more about Hanukkah. And have a wonderful afternoon celebrating your various things you celebrate. Thank you. I know, it's a pain. I know.
Good morning, I'm John Fisher, and I'm your pastoral care associate this morning. In our community here at Westside, we make time every week to share pieces of our lives with one another. We do this because each person in this community has a value. Submit your joys and concerns to the team by completing one of these forms, one of the orange forms at the welcome desk, or emailing us at pastoralcare@westsideu.org, or contacting me, John Fisher, Jane Hardwick, Phil Kappa, Robert Cote, or Brenda McKeon, who are the current members of the team. We share our concerns with one another today, knowing that sorrows come into each person's life, knowing that together we offer comfort. There are no concerns that I know of this morning. We also share our joys with one another, knowing too that joy comes into all our lives, knowing that together our voices can rise in a chorus celebration. I don't see any official joys. I have the joy that my garage door unlocked this morning, which was integral to my being here this morning. That lock has really been cranky the last few weeks. So, now we make space each week for musical centering, knowing the life and experience of every person matters, and together our lights shine brighter. Let us sing our centering song, number 352 in the Gray Hymnal, Find a Stillness.
morning. My name is Jana Francois Kennard, and I am one of the meditation leaders here at Westside. I invite you to relax your mind and body and join me in a time of meditation. We will begin with an introduction before we move into a minute of silence. Our bell will sound to signal the start of your own meditation, prayer, or reflection, and it will sound again at the end. Our meditation this morning is called Meditation for Challenging Times by the Reverend Joan Javier Duval. Holy mystery, silent presence, uncertain bearer of the weight of it all. In these quiet moments, we listen. We listen for the maybe still breathing, perhaps still whispering, faintest sign of the universal good. We listen between the cacophony of distractions pulling us toward untruth and falsehood. We listen amidst the shrill cries of desperation of, "We've had enough," of, "When will they stop killing my people?" of, "How much more will the waters rise?" of, "When will it be safe to return to my home?" of, "How much longer can I hang on?" We listen and we wait through the tumult of these days. We seek assurance. We seek the fulfillment of promise, a promise made to ourselves, a promise made to those we have been stretched to call neighbor, a promise written and enshrined and yet unfulfilled. Help us, abiding mystery, to hang on, to hold on when all is in question, when all is in doubt. Help us to stay firm to our own commitments and our own promises. Lead us back into connection, back into the bonds of humanity that help us to know each other as beloved. May we continue listening. May we keep watch. May we beckon love and justice and mercy with our own whispers, with our shouts, with our cries, until all know themselves part of the circle of love. Now let us enter into the silence together. May we be good company to one another in our questions and our journey. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.
Here at Westside, we practice our UU faith in a variety of ways. One of those ways is by giving 100% of our weekly collection, unless otherwise designated, to support organizations who carry out our transcendent values of compassion, justice, and equality. Westside's plate offering for December is Girls Incorporated, and I will refer to that as Girls Inc. of Tarrant County. Girls Inc. inspires all girls to be strong, smart, and bold. Offering its programs for girls ages 5 through 18 into their first year of higher education, it provides programming to encourage health, education, career readiness, and independence. Through advocating for girls and their futures, Girls Inc. reduces barriers in their lives that stem from violence, poverty, and inequity encountered at home, at school, or in the community. Girls Inc. is an affiliate of the national organization which evolved from girls' clubs during the Great Depression and became more formalized in 1945. Girls Inc. of Tarrant County got its start in 1976 within the Arlington Girls Club with 8 girls. Over the years, partnerships have been created with school districts, libraries, nonprofits, and local companies to provide mentoring and research-based programs that equip girls to be healthy, educated, and empowered. Recently, some of the Tarrant County commissioners voted to pull state funding earmarked for Girls Inc., which the county administers. The funding was for Girl Power, a program focusing on self-esteem, stress management, healthy relationships, and hygiene. Commissioners voting to reject the funding have values that do not align with our Unitarian Universalist values, which honor the worth and dignity of all people. Give generously as you are able to Girls Inc. and honor their worth and dignity to become who and what they want to be. Now let us enjoy musical offering The Gift, performed by Linda Ice and Dr. Yuki Kumamoto.
Quiet as a prayer. Heaven sent the one gift that we all can share. When the gift is the music, it comes from the heart, simple and true, right from the start. When the gift is the music, the words will find wings, bearing the gift back to the heart that sings. Now that it's Christmas, let all blessed be. Look for the best in all that you see. Raise up your voices to angels above. Let there be peace. Let there be love. Listen through the silence. Listen listen for the song, you will find the one gift there all along. When the gift is the music, it comes from the heart, simple and true, right from the start. When the gift is the music, the words will find wings, bearing the gift back to the heart that sings. So I give to you something always true, something always new. When the gift is the music, it comes from the heart, simple and true, right from the start. When the gift is the music, the words will find wings, bearing the gift back to the heart that sings.
Thank you for putting into practice the spiritual virtue of generosity. Our giving connects us to the wider web of our community. And also thank you for keeping your stewardship commitment current to keep our congregation's important work going. Today's reading is President Thomas Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptist Association, dated January 1st, 1802. And it is edited to include gender-inclusive pronouns. It will be read by Reverend McCracken. But first, a few words about him. A native of Midland, Thomas first came to Fort Worth in 1988 to attend TCU, although he later transferred to another school in Austin to study engineering, and subsequently attending another school in San Antonio to study law. He eventually found his way back to Fort Worth to attend Bright Divinity School. He was ordained to ministry upon graduation in 2000 by the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. His professional background includes a mix of secular and sacred work, from ministry in a local congregation to law practice. Currently, he is Assistant Vice President of Client Relations for Pension Fund of the Christian Church, a retirement benefits provider within his denomination. He has long maintained an interest in the separation of church and state, including advocacy work in Washington, D.C. at the start of George W. Bush presidential administration. The best part of his Fort Worth time, he reports, was meeting another TCU student about 25 years ago, Leah McCracken, marrying and raising 3 children together. His wife, Lee, is the Associate Chaplain and Church Relations Officer at TCU. Welcome.
Good morning. We'll start with that reading that's popularly known as the letter to the Danbury Baptist Association. I'll follow up on it a little bit more momentarily. This is what President Jefferson wrote. Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between one and one's God, that a person owes account to none other for one's faith or one's worship, that the legislative powers of government reach actions only and not opinions. I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Adhering to this expression of the Supreme will, on the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience, I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore to one all one's natural rights, convinced one has no natural right in opposition to one's social duties. Well, it's an honor to be in this space with you here and those of you online. I so appreciate the opportunity to share some reflections, and I admire this community's commitment to listening, learning, discussing, and seeking ways to make our world a better place. And I share those commitments. Much of my personal story contributes to my reflections this morning. While going to that college in Austin, two things led to my interest in the First Amendment and the separation of church and state. One, as my engineering studies held less and less of my interest, one night I recall poking around the library and stumbling upon a book discussing the 1984 Supreme Court case, Lynch versus Donnelly, appropriate for this time of year, because that case upheld the constitutionality of a city-sponsored Christian manger display. Not the best result for separationists, but I found the arguments fascinating. The second thing, and probably the bigger influence on my interest in church-state separation, is that I began dating a person whose brother was legal counsel for Americans United for separation of church and state in Washington, D.C. The girlfriend and I didn't work out, but her brother is still a friend and colleague. In fact, Steve Green's interest in this topic started right here in Fort Worth. My notes that I wrote said at TCU because he was a student in the religion department under the influence of Ron Flowers, the late Ron Flowers, probably one of the primary academics in this area. But as I sat here, I thought more. Steve actually went to high school, I think at Northside here in Fort Worth, a preacher's kid, president of his student class, and this is the 1970s. Steve tells this story, and it's hilarious when he does. It won't be when I retell it. But he had responsibility for the morning announcements over the speaker system, and as he was under the watchful eye of the coach sitting next to him as he gave those announcements, I think he would say they typically started with prayer. Steve reached around and pulled out his copy of the Bhagavad Gita, read from it, probably about 6 words into it when that coach got so red and he jerked the microphone away from Steve. So you can understand his interest in this topic. And it went on to form him to where he is now, which for the last some years is at Willamette School of Law in Oregon as a professor up there. But shortly after right after my graduation from Divinity School here in Fort Worth, I served a small church in rural Texas and then had the opportunity once George Bush went to Washington and took this faith-based initiative, which he trialed on us here in Texas, to Washington. I went to work there with some grant money as a special consultant on that study, but unfortunately, about 6 weeks into my time there, this event called 9/11 happened, and it totally changed the focus of the Bush administration for better and for worse on those topics. But let's start with a little history. I've got a slide here that will pop up. We could spend obviously days and weeks of time studying American history because it's right here in America where we developed this concept. It's unique to America and all of the world, separation of church and state. There's popular ways we see it in the news right now with the voucher debates and school prayer constantly rising up this time of year with Christmas controversies. And we know here in Texas, that the governor's push on vouchers 4 times over in special sessions have failed. And I'm not necessarily an expert on those topics, and the rise of Christian nationalism is so prominent. So if one of your future speakers comes to talk on that, I'll sit out there with you and listen myself. But let's briefly consider how the Europeans settled this country. Recall that many of those settlers were escaping religious intolerance and persecution in their home countries. Most notably, we think about the pilgrims traveling on the Mayflower, religious folks who wanted to separate from the Church of England, an established church. And despite all of what those settlers endured and were running from, what happened when they got to America? They settled their colonies, they settled their towns, and established their own beliefs right back in the colonies in many of those towns. They found that freedom here in America and repeated some of the same problems they were running from. The best example here is Roger Williams, a Puritan minister who was pushed out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony for his dissenting views, and he went on to establish the first Baptist church in North America in Providence, Rhode Island. And for his experience, he's often viewed as one of the first advocates of church-state separation, viewing religion as a matter of individual conscience, not to be supported by the government. And about 100 years after that, as some of those 17th century philosophies from Europe that influenced Roger Williams, most notably by John Locke, the English philosopher, as those trickled into the earliest days of our country, notably Thomas Jefferson, he crafted an amendment in his home colony of Virginia seeking to separate church from state for the first time. His earliest amendment to that Virginia Constitution didn't find a lot of traction in those early years. Then Jefferson's time went off into Europe to do emissary work on behalf of the government, and his ideas somewhat languished until his friend and colleague, James Madison, presented again his bill into the Virginia legislature, and it finally passed in 1786, the first instance where church and state were legally separated. The U.S. Constitution was written the following year and ratified in 1788, and Madison wrote the first 10 amendments, known as the Bill of Rights, the next year, and they were ratified in 1791 as a limit on government power and protection for individual rights. And in Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptists, he included those first 16 words of the Bill of Rights, which came from that Virginia amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And once Jefferson became president, he sought to manifest those words, maybe better than his predecessors did. Washington and Adams had held a national day of prayer, which Jefferson refused to do, and he got some criticism for that. And that's when he wrote that letter to the Danbury Baptists. Enough history. The Unitarian Universalist Association has long been a staunch supporter of religious freedom through the years. Your General Assembly has passed numerous resolutions restating its commitment to separation of church and state. Matters of school prayer, Pledge of Allegiance recitation, City Hall manger scenes, Ten Commandments displays on the Capitol lawn, these headlines are out there whenever church-state separation discussions are raised. But we live in a nation where that separation of church and state can be a little bit more fuzzy, whether we recognize it or not, in ways that are much less publicized, if publicized at all. And there's 3 topics this morning I will quickly hit on. I want to raise for discussion, raise into your consciousness to consider. And these are 3 topics I deal with on almost a daily basis. For 4 years now, I've been employed by what you heard, the Pension Fund of the Christian Church. It's an IRS-designated church retirement plan that is equivalent to your own Unitarian Universalist Organization's retirement plan, UUORP. I'll talk about this as my 3rd topic in a bit. But every association of religious bodies in the United States, Protestant, Christian, Catholic, Jewish, and others, have the ability to offer retirement plans within their own communions, if you will. So as a consequence, I'm working with ministers and churches, like I said, on a daily basis on matters related to retirements and taxes, although I'm not a tax advisor, every day. So I want to start with I'll start with a couple of the better known religious accommodations, if you will. And this first one is the fact that churches, which I'll use as a generic form for all houses of worship, in all 50 states and the District of Columbia are exempt from paying property taxes. There's a slide for that too back if we want to go to that. It's just more of a visual than anything to digest. But how do we feel about that? Churches are exempted from paying property taxes. I suppose the public policy argument is that churches are charitable, as Westside has already, even on our time and in our space here, demonstrated its support to the community. You do that with your donation of books and so many other ways. And this exemption of property tax has been upheld by the Supreme Court as not violating the First Amendment. Fuzzy lines of separation of church and state. Should churches be treated differently than residential properties, than corporate real estate? If the exemption was removed and churches paid property tax, well, surely churches would have less ability to be charitable in the community. And maybe a lot of those charitable responsibilities would be shifted back to the government or other social services agencies, which might then strain budgets on those groups, the government and social service agencies. But additional tax revenue on real estate for churches might help those government budgets and reduce the overall tax burden on the rest of us property taxpayers. So that's one I wanted to highlight a little bit. Not a clear line of separation of church and state, right? Treated a little bit differently here. So a second way that fuzzy lines of separation of church and state are lived out in our community. And this is one that comes from the IRS, something called the Minister's Housing Allowance. This is one I'm very well aware of. You maybe less so. It allows ministers of the gospel, yes, that's written in there, to exclude a portion of our salary for housing-related purposes. Pretty good thing for me and some of my ministry colleagues, right? All of us would like to exclude some income from income tax. It's a strange history that this privilege finds roots all the way back in colonial America, back when some of those colonies were establishing religion and giving favorable treatment to ministers. But later on in the history of our country, this same exemption almost rises in a different arena, following a unique doctrine called the employer doctrine, which was an amendment to the Revenue Act of 1921, a predecessor to our modern Internal Revenue Code. This employer doctrine was crafted around employees working in situations where housing was provided as a necessity to employment. Think about fishing boats. Fishermen had nowhere else to live except on the boat. Logging camps, when loggers had to live out in remote parts of the country doing their logging duties. Think about mining camps. Those of us from West Texas, think about the oil field workers that lived out in the middle of nowhere. And, as argued by some, ministers who were provided living quarters as a necessary condition of working for a congregation. This concept was originally accepted as a parsonage amendment to that Revenue Act in 1921. And certainly back 100 years ago, most churches had a parsonage or a church-owned house provided to the minister, which could be seen as a necessity for that minister to be living in the house. And in following years, this parsonage amendment was expanded to other housing arrangements where churches may not have a parsonage, but might give cash incentive instead to that minister to purchase one's own housing arrangement, be it buying a house, renting an apartment. So by the time the 1954 Internal Revenue Code came around, this tax benefit was put into law, whether as a parsonage or a cash allowance, and it's still in effect today. So here's just a couple practice notes on that, because I'm sure West Side ministers have used this benefit in years past. So some of you in leadership might know this. Number one, that housing allowance must be designated in advance. A minister can't come to the end of the church year and tally up the minister's receipts and give a number that the minister wants to exclude from income tax. No, that housing allowance has to be designated in advance by the minister, recorded in the church budget, recorded in church minutes for what is going to be spent on housing. Then the second thing is the minister has to spend that amount on housing. Anything that goes unspent has to then be returned to the taxable column. So not surprisingly, this tax benefit's been litigated through the years. Perhaps no more notably than a tax court case titled Warren v. Commissioner. Maybe you know the Warren. That's Pastor Rick Warren of the Saddleback Church in Southern California, one of the largest churches in the United States. Author of a very popular Bible study about 20 years ago, The Purpose-Driven Life. It's a Baptist congregation, notably kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention earlier this year for having women in ministry positions. This tax case is often oversimplified as simply allowing Rick Warren to claim an extravagant parsonage as housing allowance. Yes, that might seem unethical, if not immoral, to many of us. But the larger issue is that Rick Warren was excluding 100% of his salary as housing allowance. And that practice has so far been upheld in litigation, even clarified in a 2002 law. So West Side, how do we feel about these fuzzy lines of separation? Where is the line on this exclusion? The congressman that introduced the clarifying law in 2002 spoke passionately about that appellate court that ruled against Warren, saying, "Mr. Speaker, in one of the most obvious cases of judicial overreach in recent memory, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco is posed to inflict a devastating tax increase on America's clergy by eliminating a common practice for 81 years at that time." Overstating it? Not in Washington, D.C., right? So the third area I want to raise this morning, where fuzzy lines are in our society, is the one I work on probably most closely, and that's in church retirement plans. As I mentioned earlier, most religious denominations, church bodies, worshiping communities have the ability to offer retirement plans, pensions and otherwise, to ministers and other church workers. Most of these plans started years ago, before modern legislation, to not only take care of ministers in retirement, but also to fit the unique employment situation of ministers that might move from one church to another. And these plans allowed them from the beginning to maintain a consistent retirement participation as they move from church to church. And there can be nuances from one plan to another. I can't speak on the UUORP. Different types of benefits offered, and the organizations are always structured a little bit differently. But in modern times, the passage of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA, in 1974, that law made, for the first time, a comprehensive way for the United States to govern retirement in the U.S. From the beginning, church plans have always been exempted from ERISA oversight, as well as various portions of the Internal Revenue Code. I just returned yesterday from legal training in Indianapolis, so my mind is swirling right now with all the nuances of this, and I don't want to get bogged down. That's not our purpose here this morning. But what this means for these church plans and the employees to whom those plans provide benefits is that they get to operate without some of the oversight that secular plans are held to under ERISA and portions of the Internal Revenue Code. Church plans get to operate a little bit leaner financially, if you will. And, okay, this is one of my sales points. We pass those savings on to the beneficiaries of our plans. Furthermore, church plans have the ability to offer that housing allowance I spoke about previously to our retirees in their retired years. So ministers not only have the ability to exclude housing expenses during their years of ministry, but potentially for the rest of their life in retirement. And of course, this is a well-litigated benefit as well, but thus far it remains standing. As you can imagine, without some of the governmental oversight, there is potential for abuse as well if a church plan does not have sufficient governance. As a recent shocking example, consider our siblings in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, a historically African American branch of Methodist Protestantism. And their Department of Retirement Services, their church plan, for 2 decades, roughly 2000 to 2020, the church had repeatedly elected one man, the Reverend Jerome Harris, to run the retirement plan, almost solely run the retirement plan. And he reported back to the church steady growth all along. The church plan serves about 5,000 clergy and church employees, and after he retired in 2020, his successor in 2021 found that more than $90 million was missing from the AME retirement plan through high-risk investments, as well as payments and loans to himself and to others. So how do we feel about these fuzzy lines of separation between church and state? Does this exemption for churches represent an establishment of religion by the government? Or is it the opposite? By staying out of church affairs, is the government avoiding religious entanglement? This is what makes history, what makes politics, what makes law so fun, right, Westside? I want to thank you for listening, learning, discussing, and through all this, having conversation with one another, being involved in your community, being involved with your politicians, seeking to make this world a better place.
Thank you very much for that reflection. Very informative. And a little scary. Please stand as you are able and join in the closing hymn, number 112 in the gray hymnal, Do You Hear? Our closing words today are Remembering That the Universe is Larger by Marjorie Newland Leeming. Remembering that the universe is so much larger than our ability to comprehend, let us go forth from this time together with the resolve to stop trying to reduce the incomprehensible to our own petty expectations, so that wonder, that sense of what is sacred, can find space to open up our minds and illumine our lives. The chalice is now extinguished, but its light lives on in the minds and hearts and souls of each one of you. Carry that flame with you as you leave this place and share it with those you know, with those you love, and most especially with those who you have yet to meet. And now please stand and join me in the congregational closing. Go in peace, seeking justice. Go in peace, committed to equal rights. Go in the peace that's created when together we build communities of true solidarity, deep compassion, and fierce, unrelenting love. Peace.
Amen.